series that we've been in entitled Freedom from Persistent Temptations. Freedom from Persistent Temptations. And this was a message that was birthed out of a message we preached about 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago entitled Little by Little, taking it from Deuteronomy chapter number 7, verses 17 through 26, where we saw that although Jesus changes us or saves us all at once, he changes us little by little. In fact, he says that he's going to give all these enemies over to the children of Israel, but he says, I'm not going to give them over to you all at once. And as a result of that, we saw how to be able to fight sin in our lives. And we saw that we're supposed to hate it, we're supposed to starve it, and we're supposed to outsmart it. Now, if you weren't here for that message, I don't have the time to go and develop each one of those points again. But as a result of that, the Lord continued to mess with me a bit concerning those things, saying, there's more there. Do you want it? I said, yes, sir. And so we began to get into looking at a little bit more about not just habitual sin, on how to hate it, starve it, and outsmart it, but we began to dig into those persistent temptations in our lives. The things that we do in our lives that disappoint ourselves, and there's things that you do as well as that I do. Have you ever been disappointed with yourself? All of us have at one time or another in our lives. And yet at the same time, in disappointing ourselves, we know that it must disappoint God. And the reason why I believe it's such a heavy load for us is because it's things that we want to be free from, but things that we find ourselves doing over and over again. Now, you got to remember that good intentions are not good enough. It takes more than good intentions to change. And if you could change just because of your desire to change, or if you could change just because of good intentions, you would have already done so. Well, now we found that the Apostle Paul, he understood this cycle of failure. And we're not going to spend a lot of time in this area this morning, but I am going to give you each point that we've covered already, maybe not quite as much in the detail that we did before. But Paul understood this cycle of failure. In Romans chapter 7, verse number 15 from the New Living Translation, it says this, I don't understand myself. How many of you have ever said that about yourself? I don't understand what's going on. This is not me. Have you ever said that? That's what Paul's saying here. He says, I don't understand myself. For I really want to do what's right. And I think every one of us in this room have made that statement before. I really want to do what's right. And that's what he's saying. I really want to do what's right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do the very thing that I hate. So as a result of that, understanding that there are persistent temptations in our lives, we need to ask ourselves the question, how do I break that cycle of failure? How do I break that stronghold in my life? How do I break free from that persistent temptation? One of the first things that we looked at, we're going to look at 7 steps in all, but the very first one was this. We spent a lot of time on that, and if you're here visiting this morning or just out catching into this message, I would encourage you to be able to get a copy of the CD from a couple of weeks ago, because we dealt with the first thing here, and that was predetermining our pattern of temptation. Predetermining our pattern of temptation. Now, what that means is you need to understand your pattern of temptation. In other words, if you don't know what weakens you and what tempts you, you're never going to be free from persistent temptation. You need to take inventory of your life. You need to pay close attention to what's going on, the steps that you go through just prior to giving into temptation. All of us have a unique pattern to our lives. Every one of us. None of them are the same. What tempts you doesn't tempt me. What tempts me may not tempt you. So we got to understand that pattern, understand those steps that we're taking just prior to giving in to temptation. We used a couple of scriptures here in Proverbs chapter 5, verse number 6. It says this, the immoral person, that's not who we're trying to be, but it's going to tell us what goes on in the immoral person's life. The immoral person does not care about the path of life. Now, if you don't care, then you're the immoral person. If you don't care about changing, you're just kind of like, think that you're going to play the roll of the dice and hope to make it in, you've been grossly deceived. The Bible declares the immoral person does not care about the path of life. It says she staggers down a crooked trail. We know that there's a straight path to everlasting life, but she travels down a crooked trail, and what's wild is, doesn't even realize where it leads. Then we begin to look at Lamentations chapter 3, verse number 40, from the Message translation, and I love this particular translation of this verse, because it says, let us take a good look. What kind of look? A good look, not a glance. And that's our problem. We just want to take a glance, quick look. No, take a good look at the way that we're living. And after you take that good look at the way that you're living, then you may have to, and I would like to say I have to, many times, reorder our lives under God, which lets me know that our life at that particular time was walking in a way that was not under God, but you were under the influence of the devil. So if you can identify the patterns that tempt you, then you can predict the problems in advance and you can avoid those situations. So the very first step in breaking free from persistent temptation is to determine your pattern of temptation. Second step is this: plan to avoid it. Once you recognize it, and if you don't know your pattern of temptation, I'll tell you who knows your pattern. The devil does. He knows all about you. That's how he knows how to set this particular trap in your life. That's how he knows how to find the opportune time to come against you. So once you identify it, then what you got to do is you've got to avoid it. Proverbs chapter number 4, verses 26 and 27, it says this: plan carefully. Plan how? This is not just fly by night. Well, let's see what happens today. No, plan carefully what you do. It says avoid evil. Do what with evil? Avoid evil. That's the second step. Avoid evil. Avoid evil and walk straight ahead. And I love this translation because the verbiage here says this: don't go one step off the right way. And there's too many of us say, well, one step ain't going to hurt. And, I'm not that far off base. I can still see the trail. And you don't realize by taking that one step, you could be on a slippery bank and find yourself sliding into the sin that you were trying to avoid. So it says, don't take one step off the right path. So you need to understand that you need to build boundaries in your life. And I'm hoping to get to that this morning in just a few moments. And once you know the patterns that you're used to falling into, then you need to say, I'm not going to put myself, and you can't do it in your own strength, but I'm not going to put myself in that situation. And the only way that you can make that statement is to realize that you can't do it all on your own. You've got to trust God to give you the strength to predetermine your pattern of temptation and then plan to avoid it, which leads to step number 3. And the third step in breaking free from persistent temptation in your life is this: you must protect the condition of your heart. Say that with me. I must protect the condition of my heart. Say it again. I must protect the condition of my heart. Proverbs chapter 4, verse number 23 says it this way: above all else. When you see those 3 words, you got to realize the importance of what's getting ready to follow. Above all else, guard your heart. Why? For it affects everything. It affects what? It affects everything that you do. So if you want to change something that is continually causing you to stumble, you don't start with your behavior. You don't start trying to say, I'm going to try to be good, because you can't be good enough. You got to start with your heart. You got to start on the inside of you, because God always works from the inside out. Say that with me. God always works from the inside out. You don't start by trying to change your behavior by sheer willpower, saying things like this: I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. All you're doing is just sounding like a parrot, because it's not going to do anything for you. You don't change on the outside. Your behavior must change on the inside. And as a result of you just trying to do it by willpower, you don't really change yourself, because you can't change yourself. Bible says in Jeremiah 17:5, cursed is the man that trusts in the arm of the flesh. So if you want to change a persistent pattern in your life that you don't like about yourself, you don't focus on your behavior. You don't focus on your circumstances. We blame things on our circumstances, but you don't focus on them. You don't focus on temptation, and you don't even focus on how you feel. Remember, if your feelings rule you, they will ruin you. If your feelings rule you, they will ruin you. So you need to focus. You need to what? Come on, focus with me this morning. You need to focus on what's going on in your heart. Psalm 26, verse number 2 says this: examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my mind and my heart. That's a prayer that most of us would be afraid to pray, because you're asking God to examine you. You're asking God to allow you to see yourself as He sees you, because many of us have even deceived ourselves that we're pretty good people. But when you put on God's set of eyes, all of a sudden the examination takes on a whole new light, all right? It says, examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my mind and try my heart. Psalm 139, verse 23.